who were suffering under a contracted economy, and sometimes, facing a government which is hell-bent on blaming the opposition. Changes to the Board of Legal Education probably is not at the top of the, or in the minds of the people. But I do want to comment briefly on this change in the law. This is not because we oppose the change, Mr. Speaker. I can understand the reasons given behind the change. But just looking at the bill, it just worries me that the powers are given to the Attorney General. And I've seen, Mr. Speaker, on many occasions where we've had changes in law that all the discretion is given to the minister. I want to say a couple of things on that, Mr. Speaker. The Board of Legal Education, of course, vets the legal training available to Fiji lawyers. And I remember this being an important aspect of the curriculum and the law program approved by various university senates, and especially at USP when I was there. Lawyers have to go, as I understand it, 10 hours of continuous legal education every year. The content of this must also be approved by the board. In other words, much of the training is actually, Mr. Speaker, offered by the lawyers themselves. So to a great extent, it is the board which controls the Fiji, what essentially the Fiji lawyers learn. And so the effect of the bill to replace 2 members of the Board of Legal Education, previously the Attorney General, the Honourable Attorney General has, as the relevant minister, was required by the law to appoint the Dean of the USP Law School and the Dean of nominated Overseas Law School to the board. So what this change means was, this is what he wants to change. It is true that times have changed. I mean, there are 3 universities. At that time when this was there was only 1 university. And it is also true that we have fewer overseas trained lawyers. Most of them are trained locally now. But now the bill seeks to replace these appointments by giving the Honourable Minister the power to appoint whoever he wants. Now, there is no restriction or definition of these 2 positions. The current Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, may do the right thing. He may appoint people with legal background. I have no doubt that he would do that. But as I have always said, Mr. Speaker, when you change a law, you ought to look at not who is the current minister in charge of doing that, but those who will come after. And it is very important. I mean, sometimes these kind of discretions, you don't want a hairdresser to, for example, go and sit in the legal education board. But in countries, this has happened, I mean, it has happened. And that's why it is very important that we have there is always a restriction on the discretionary powers of ministers, in some of these legislations where the designated type of individuals who should be on these kind of boards are stipulated in the legislation. And that was the reason why it was there in the previous legislation that, you must have at least a Dean of Law of a law school at that time, the only law school in Fiji. For example, Mr. Speaker, and I want to raise this. There's been a significant comment about the way in which the acting Chief Justice, for example, has reversed decisions by magistrates and another judge and about curfew breakers. It is clear that these decisions are controversial. I want to listen to it. I'm coming to that. If the Fiji Law Society if the Fiji Law Society, for example, Mr. Speaker, wish to hold a continuing education session on these decisions, if they are concerned, because I've seen that they have issued a statement, then it is important. And law societies in many countries, I can write things myself already. In many countries, bar associations, law societies have a very, very important role. And I am told that this legislation, Mr. Speaker, there was no consultation even with the law society. And in fact, if there is any change that needs to come into this legislation, Mr. Speaker, I would say that a representative of the Fiji Law Society should be on the board, and that should be stipulated in the law itself. It's very important, Mr. Speaker, for the government to consult with the appropriate legal fraternity, and in this case, the Fiji Law Society. So, as I said, Mr. Speaker, these are important considerations that we need to have when we change legislations in this manner. What I've seen, Mr. Speaker, with this government, and some of the laws that we've changed in the past, it's kind of about control. Having the discretion to control things is not always a good thing. It doesn't inspire confidence in the law that is implemented. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is a bit disappointing that we are changing this law without, of course, consulting the major stakeholder, the Fiji Law Society, and replacing that designated representation with an open designation which says 2 people, which doesn't even say, it could have said 2 people with absolute legal background, or 2 legal academics, or 2 professors of law. It's not in the bill. So, Mr. Speaker, these are some serious concerns I have with the amendment, and I would urge the Attorney General to rethink about this and ensure that there is a designated representation within the legislation. Obviously the Honourable Attorney General will appoint, but will have to appoint within those parameters. For example, in the previous case, we had the Dean of Law. We could say, 1 Dean of Law chosen from the 3 universities or something like that, which then makes it very clear that the appointment will be within that ambit, within that definition. It will not be an open check for the minister to appoint the 2 people that he or she wants, according to the proposed amendment to the legislation, Mr. Speaker. So once again, I think it's a very important point. It may seem minor. It is not a reflection on what the current Attorney General might be doing, but it's about a law that we are changing here in Parliament, and we need to ensure that what we are changing is appropriately reflected in the nature of what the Legal Education Board is going to do, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Biman Prasad for his contribution to the debate. Is anyone else wishing to take the floor? There's a lot of talking, but if you want to take the floor, you have the floor. Honourable Minister Wanganimete, you have the floor.
Honourable Speaker, I'd like to contribute to the debate and say that I support the motion before the House. The bill